Time to talk about the compressed natural gas issue, the CNG initiative of the federal government, which has now become more of a phenomenon than it was just a few years ago. Of course, we've talked on this program quite a number of times about the adoption of this alternative as we now know it, in light of what petrol price is doing to the pockets of everyday Nigerians. But the challenge of rolling out this initiative, as laudable as some people say it otherwise is, has also been very visible by those who are pushing it. So important it is to the government that there is even an agency rolling out this scheme and midwifing the entire process. How effective or otherwise that has been remains to be seen. We've seen a potpourri of reactions, some of them counter to this laudable objective otherwise. But let's talk to someone who has a handle on both the technicalities and the economics of this conversation. Dr. Wisdom Enang is an energy sector consultant and expert. He joins us live via Zoom from Lagos this morning. Doc, thank you for taking all the time to join us on the program.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Let's begin with what we're now seeing with the free bus rides, the CNG powered bus, and so on and so forth. You and I have not really taken out time to maybe discuss specifics regarding timelines. But talk to us as to how ideally a scheme like this, considering the peculiarity of the circumstances under which we operate as a country, should be rolled out.
Okay, the CNG scheme, really needs certain imperatives. And before I can draw those imperatives, I'd like to talk about the tenets of energy security, which has to do with affordability, accessibility, and availability. Now, the biggest challenge with CNG is that though it does address the affordability component, but the issue of accessibility and availability is the biggest concern. So you're asking yourselves, how do you get reliable supply of the CNG in other regions outside, say, Lagos or Abuja? I think that's the most important thing that people are asking themselves and trying to wonder for. And then you find out that the government is trying to quickly roll out some of these schemes, but it is also meeting a backlash because of the fact that other countries, for example, like Malaysia, I believe, or is Indonesia or Malaysia, one of them has recently taken a back seat on some of those gas technologies, citing the safety concerns because of the ability to manufacture and certify cylinders. And so this is now a challenge that the government is facing. However, I think we also have the challenge of the adoption of the technology itself because of domestication, how fast we can domesticate the technology. I mean, it's not just enough to get imported technology and apply it in Nigeria. Sometimes it helps if you can domesticate that technology and own it from a research standpoint. And that's where we're also struggling at the moment.
Quite interesting. That struggle, again, it's very visible given what we now see in this country. Nigeria is particularly dealing with quite severe economic hardship at this point in time. Of course, that has been the case for a while now. But let's look at, yes, affordability. A lot of persons say when you place the CNG costs and that of the traditional petrol, so to speak, side by side, of course, the CNG will wane all day, every day. But even at that, the if you like, the starter pack costs is not very pocket friendly for most Nigerians. I mean, everyday Nigerians, for example. Talk to us about the economics of this narrative.
Yes, I mean the starter pack, like you said, is not very pocket friendly because at the time it was about 400 and something thousand naira for a conversion kit. Right now we're talking about 1 million at least for the least one. And yes, it is not pocket friendly. It's just when you run the math from an operational standpoint that you get to see some of those savings and take advantage of the gains, and ultimately that would pay off the starter pack. The other issue that I think it's worth noting is that other countries, for example, I'd like to say Ghana and even India, have done something to overcome that initial inertia from a cost perspective. What they've done is to say, okay, if you're earning a certain amount and you want to convert, they've got energy funds within the regular banks. And those banks will provide those funds for you. It will help you with conversion. It will help you with any energy transition project at a domestic level. And they will take that money over time at a very low interest rate. And what that simply means, maybe in your regular banks, you can go and ask for, that you want to apply for, say, a 1 million naira to help you with your conversion. And that money is not paid to you, by the way, it's paid to the conversion center, who would then send them, say, the serial number of the kit that was used for your conversion, and that's locked as part of the paperwork. And then you can take it home, and over time, you sign an agreement that your money is deducted at source from the source that you had declared. And sometimes those sources are maybe government employment or private employment. In those countries, they do have a list of the employers for which they have gotten a sort of an agreement for them to undertake such a loan with their staff. So those are some of the ways that we can overcome the inertia, but it is a very strong inertia. And definitely, we do need government to help subsidize some of those kits, because if you're thinking about making money ultimately from the one, the fact that you want to expand the industry. Two, you're also thinking about making money from the fact that you also want to ensure people adopt that source of energy as well. You would want to reduce the inertia, the front loading inertia, and the way to do that is to say, okay, we'll give some subsidies for the first movers. So what the government can do is say, look, the first few people, we have 100,000 slots. The first 100,000 that want to adopt this technology, we're ready to give it to you at maybe half price. And that would even create a huge rush where people would even subscribe. So you hear where government are offering, making an offering, and then there are oversubscribers on that offering. I think that's one of the ways I will put some icing on the cake to help people even come forward with interest.
All right, let me ask you this. When you look at where we are today and the process we've seen so far, Doc, would you say we got off on the right footing with this initiative?
Well, I think I like to tell people there are two ways to jump. It's either you're sorry, there are two ways to uh, go through change. It's either you're pushed or you jump, and none of it is comfortable. The only thing is the imperatives that would have been on either side. If the government allowed us to jump as at when we're ready, that means certain imperatives would have been built. We would have had a more developed supply base, would have had more accessible points of inventory disbursement for the CNG, and would have also had even more gas infrastructure locally. Because remember, a lot of our developments for gas infrastructure are export oriented, just because of the legacy of the industry. The industry was set up for export. It's only now that we're looking at domesticating some of our energy through gas. So yes, I do agree. There were some afterthoughts that came in, and that's driving us, well, neither moving forward nor backwards, because we are held spellbound by some of those indecisions that we had, that plagued us right from the beginning. And then I do also believe that there is no way to use just a command and conquer approach to run this. And by that I mean, even if you said let's deregulate and increase the prices of PMS, and at the same time you do the same for other fuels, because other countries have done the same. They increase the taxes on the normal conventional fuels. They also put subsidies on the CNG. Without solving the infrastructure problem, you will not have a high penetration rate. It's still going to be the same challenge that we're having. Without solving the safety concerns that people are having, based on how well how well you intimate people on how to utilize the gas technology, we're always going to have the inertia. People are going to be scared. People are going to be benchmarking their thoughts about using it versus, the concerns that they're having, the safety concerns that they're having about incidents that are occurring even in their neighborhood or even abroad. So I think the government has a very serious work to do. The funding is another problem. I keep saying, look, and I ask myself, when we talk about pension funds, and we're talking about some of the idle funds I think we can tap into. I think for running our energy transition show, I'll be very, very honest and say, look, if I were the government, right? I know they do allow, I think, 25% if you've left your job for a while and you want to tap into your pension fund. I think one other way to do it is to allow people to tap into their pension fund for another 10% to fund their energy transition needs. Because to be honest, I'm one of the people that actually ask what really happens to these pension funds, especially for people that work, get the pension savings done, and then do not live up to that age. So I think these are some of the idle pool funds that we can allow individuals tap into to overcome the inertia. I mean, we are at the point where we've been pushed by circumstances. And so desperate times calls for desperate actions. And I think the government needs to think out of the box in order to solve some of these challenges and create imperatives for CNG technologies to thrive.
Quite an interesting one. It appears, I mean, it happens apparently that we are in an era where across the world the conversation centers basically on energy transition. We see Nigerian public officials, sometimes the president or the vice president attending some of these events even beyond the shores of Africa. How much has that been a blessing or otherwise to us as a country?
Right. I mean, it's a blessing because we have gone out there to advocate that we're ready for the transition, we're ready to create a business. But that whole body language alone, and not
Hmm.
even the command approach, can help us to do the transition. Because let me tell you what India did. I'll give you India's story. India started with saying the Supreme Court said, look, we're going to raise the emissions limits to make sure that for you to even attempt to meet that limit, you must use an alternative vehicular technology or of some sort, and not just a conventional one. And that was when CNG, hybrid electric vehicles became in view. But they didn't stop there. India decided, okay, we're going to reduce the tariffs. We're going to even create some sort of incentive to help the first movers get some advantage. And like I said, the first 100,000 people that want to subscribe across the country apply through the portal. We are going to give you certain incentives to allow you subscribe onto the CNG initiative. That's one. Because what would happen there is when people subscribe initially, you might find out that you called for 100,000, but over 2 million will subscribe. And then you now say, okay, look, we can only do this for 100,000, but for the rest, we are going to give you, let's say, 5% support. But ultimately, you have a net, a net that have got people in there, but and then you're trying to churn them in from just people that are interested in the interested bucket to people that actually enroll and convert. So that's another way to do it. And then the third way to do it is to partner with companies, because ultimately, let me tell you what's going on. A lot of companies have said, look, um, a lot of companies, for example, in Ghana, because of the way the government has done, has told their staff, look, there's this government incentives for companies that can help some of their staff convert to and enroll into energy transition. Can we help you? Say, for example, we're going to help you convert, put money forward towards your conversion or whatever amount you have. If the conversion is 1 million, you bring 500, we bring 500, and then we can put that towards our tax credits towards to the government. I think we need very ingenious ways. And then one of the ways to say, look, going forward, any vehicle, regardless of what happens, must be from manufacturer, must be CNG enabled. And I tell you what, we have, even if you want to buy Toyota today, if you're buying as a government and you're buying, say, maybe 500 units, for example, Toyota could easily say, look, we've got models, we can retrofit what you want, we can do an aftermarket hybrid vehicle for you. We can also retrofit the CNG kits and bring them in country. These are all possibilities. And so the government can even start from themselves, say, going forward, any new vehicle that we want to bring in is going to be CNG enabled for anybody, regardless. Because when you send that, when you send that signal, you're sending a signal that you're consistent, you know what you're doing, you're walking the talk, and you're also sending the signal that yes, you're trying to stimulate the growth of a market that you can possibly expand for an investor to come in and take part of. And if that market is still a niche, it's not yet a market, you're just still thinking about it, it hasn't matured, then investors are skeptical. And that's usually what happens. So I think the government has a lot of work to do to engender and create a market out of the subsisting need at the moment.
It sounds like we have a long way to go in this regard. Obviously, you have made allusion to the public-private partnership elements. I was hoping we could discuss in this regard. But let's talk about timeline for things like this, because most times we roll out initiatives like this and we are not so clear as to what the turnaround time is, what the faces will be, who are bringing into the nets, and things like that. And the next thing you know is there's election cycle again. A government leaves office, a new government comes in, policy somersault, and what have you. Walk us through this confusion.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'd like to say from the beginning is that in most countries, one of the enablers that makes policies to work is when there is a legal binding around the policy itself. So I think we need to learn to legislate our policies and look at the one of the key success of that approach, which is the the NLNG. And if you look at it, you find out that the NLNG today is a success because there's some legislative framework. That means that investors that are coming in know that this is not just some sort of brainwave from the current administration, that it is something that has been passed into law, and the law would make sure that it works regardless of who comes in. And so they can put their money on there. It's tied to the sovereignty of the country. So that's the first step we need to take. If we're serious, go look at the framework. There is no singular one that known to me exclusive, a legal backing that is given to CNG. But we should develop it. It all starts with developing our regulations. It all starts with developing our, some sort of terms of use of technology. It all starts with developing our standards. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to show investors that you're not just talking about it, but there is the right body language in addition to all the other market imperatives. But if you're asking what is the timeline, I see between 18 to 24 months is the time that we'll begin to see a very, very holistic stimulation of the market. But then it is not going to be federal driven alone. We will need the subnationals, we will need the private sector. I think the subnationals need to really drive this as well. If we do not get that cooperation and it's just a top-down approach, it's just going to end as it's just going to end as if it's a feasibility study. It's never going to proliferate the market enough to create that such a market activity out of the need, and that will allow investors to tap in. Remember, each time people come to do their math analysis, they say, well, we have over 200 million people in Nigeria, and this is the market we intend to capture. But without the right imperative, you don't even have a market. You have 200 people with the need for cheaper fuel, but then there is no market because you haven't been able to create the imperatives to stimulate the market out of the need.
Quite a challenge, but then there's still the concern about how that while we're pursuing the CNG as maybe the alternative, who knows, maybe ultimately the future, it happens that conversations around Port Harcourt refinery, Dangote refinery, and all of the issues around the so-called dirty fuel are still here. Could that be a distraction? I'm asking, while on the one hand we're discussing CNG, on the other hand we are still focused on crude and all the products from it. Does that not distract us from the amount of effort that we should be putting into our pursuit of the CNG?
No, it doesn't distract us at all. And I'll give you context. Remember, I'll give you some numbers. Africa only contributes 4% of the global, emissions footprint, and so Africa has advocated for, and the world has accepted the need for a just transition for Africa. So it's not about transition or energy transition based on, okay, this is what the Europeans are doing, let's do it. It's a just transition. What does the just transition do? A just transition leverages a cleaner form of energy that is affordable, available, and accessible to be able to enable that transition in a way that does not alter the economic situation of your country for worse. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to go for, say, nuclear energy, but that's going to alter the economics of your country because perhaps it makes it more expensive and all of that, and the safety component, that's not the just transition. So that's the first foot to put forward. The second foot to put forward is that Africans said, look, gas is the transition fuel that we have, but we're also looking at reducing the carbon footprint even from the conventional fuels. And one of the ways to do that is to either consume more efficiently or to reduce the per capita consumption of PMS. And if you look at our per capita consumption of PMS, right, you look at how the PMS consumption per our population, you find out that according to the report from the NMDPRA, it has dropped by about 90%. So that means that, because of the high cost, we have reduced the consumption. So if you divide the carbon footprint of the PMS consumption versus the population, it has dramatically dropped. So that's even energy transition on its own. It's not just the move from one form of energy to the other, it's the utilization of energy more efficiently. And if the driver is a cost factor, then so be it. So ultimately, these are all coming together in the narrative of energy transition. But I think the biggest distraction for us has been the failure to develop a framework to harness our gas, both for domestic use, like we've seen. For example, in Nigeria, we have less than 7,000 kilometers of pipelines, and we have the eighth largest reserve in the world for gas, and then the number one largest reserve in Africa. But India, nowhere to be found among the countries that produce oil or gas, but they have 79,000 kilometers of gas pipelines. What does that tell you? India understands the role of gas pipelines as it correlates to the level of industrialization that any nation can achieve. So, in a nutshell, we have been hampered by our indecisions and poor decisions leading up to today, and not really the functionality of those refineries that allow us to be able to achieve a just energy transition.
Let's talk about on the final note as we wrap up now, Doc. Awareness on the part of Nigerians. The CNG thing, especially for starters, still seems like an elitist initiative of some kind, right? So, how do we get the message to the grassroots in such a way that the person with the least or the minimal education, whatever it is, understands what the conversation is about?
Very, very interesting question. I think, this is where the government needs to know that we need to bring the guys that are experts to the table. If I were to be the president, what will I do? I'll realize that, look, there's very limited reach within which we can reach with my presidential initiative committee. And so I'm going to ask them to look, bring academias, to recruit academia from all the universities into the team, recruit or what we call initiative champions from all the various institutions to the team. I'd also ask that they bring groups, technical groups like the Nigerian Society of Engineers, for example, who are going to hold technical workshops. So across the various branches, I think they're well represented in the major cities in Nigeria, and so you make sure that those guys are brought to the table. They buy into that technology. We have a stakeholder deliberation, and they put together a framework that would allow people appreciate the economics and the safety aspects of CNG, in addition to intimating those people on how they would safely use CNG so that it doesn't pose a problem from a safety standpoint. And then when you do that, you send these guys out to the nooks and the crannies of the country, and they will help you sell the story. And it's even better a story to sell by a third party that is an independent expert in that field than the government selling it. So I think this is not just the presidential initiative wanting to do everything and anything. It should be them driving the initiative, but other people executing that initiative. And I think from an advocacy standpoint, NGO groups are very important. We need to have the technical folks from the university who are going to help us tell that story. The technical groups like the Nigerian Society of Engineers are also professional groups, and all the safety groups very important to drive that story.